Hello YouTube, Sidekick here, back in my trusty A-10A Warthog. In my last video, we did a little bit of an introduction and took the OG hog out to the range. Today, we're actually going to do a little bit more of an introduction to the complete module. I am going to be using the Clickable Cockpit mod, but I will also let you know what hotkeys or shortcuts you need to bind to use it, because it isn't a fully clickable cockpit. So, let's get started. Unlike modern high-fidelity models, the startup procedure in the A-10A is pretty simple. All we're going to have to do is to turn on the electrical power, and then we're just going to have to start the engines one at a time. So you can either bind the command for the electrical power switch, and a separate command for engine start left and engine start right, or you can install the Clickable Cockpit mod, link in the description, and that will allow you to simply reach over here on the right-hand panel and click to turn on the electrical power. And you'll be able to tell it's on because your HUD will come up. And then all you have to do is look over here on the left-hand side and first click the switch for engine start left. And you will immediately hear the APU engage. And you can see the APU dials, which are now spooling up. There's only one APU, so it's used for both engines. Now, the startup sequence is reasonably lengthy. The APU has to spool up, and then the ignition sequence has to start, and you'll know that's happening when your left-hand engine dials start to actually move. But you will have to wait until the engine comes up to about 25%. You see it's starting to spin now. You can see the left-hand engine dial starting to move. And you can see that the engine is spooling up. It will have to get up to about 25%, and the APU will automatically shut off. And then you'll be able to repeat the procedure for the right-hand engine. So we just need to let it come up fully to 25% power. You don't have to do anything with the throttle. Okay, now that it is started and the APU's gone back to 0, we click the right-hand engine start, or alternatively press either the button on your HOTAS or the key that you bound to that command, and the right engine start sequence will start. And same thing, the APU will first spool up, and then the engine will ignite, and you'll know that's happening when the right-hand engine dials start to move. And when they do that, you can look and you can see that the engine is starting to spin. At that point, we can reach over here and close the canopy. And once again, you can also bind that command to either a key or to your HOTAS. So while we're just sitting here on the ramp, we'll take a quick look at some other clickable areas of the cockpit in the Clickable Cockpits mod. The first is the master mode switch. Fortunately, I'm not sure it's actually working properly. It seems to switch between nav and CCIP, but actually it ends up in air-to-air mode when it says nav. So I'm not sure I trust that. I'm going to leave that as a button on my HOTAS. Now, there's also another area that is very useful to be able to access is the weapons control area here. And you can actually control the modes with the rotational switch. So you can go from singles to pairs to ripple pairs to ripple single. And you can also control the number of weapons that are dropped, and also the delay between the drop, and you can actually use the buttons to select the weapons change button. So again, you can either bind those keys, bind those commands to keys on your keyboard or to buttons on your HOTAS, but it is kind of useful to have access to them actually in the cockpit. The other command that you might find useful to have in the cockpit is the flaps, although again that's on my HOTAS, but if you click that you can see We've taken 1 notch of flaps, and with that, I think maybe we're ready to start taxiing. So one thing you're going to notice about the A-10A compared to some of the other iron bombers that we've been looking at, especially the earlier ones, the tail draggers from World War II, the A-10A is very easy to taxi, even a lot easier, for instance, than the A4. It uses nose wheel steering. It doesn't take a lot to get rolling, and the braking is very even. So it really is much easier to taxi. There's really not a whole lot of technique to it at all. As you can see, we're straight down the taxiway here. We're just going to stop on the edge of the runway, and then we're going to get out on the runway and get ready to go. So as kind of per usual when we're looking at iron bombers here, we're at Cobaleti because we're going to use the range again today. So I do want to show you how the weapons control panel works. We kind of covered all of the different ways of using weapons in the A-10A in the last video. This one we're just using bombs. You can probably see as we were taxiing out that we've got 12 Mark 82 500-pound bombs on board, which in itself is an amazing statistic that is a testament to the A-10A. When we've been checking other aircraft, I've had to use unlimited ammo so that we'd have enough times to go around on the range. With the A-10A, there's no need. It carries enough in and of itself. Okay, takeoff in the A-10A is quite simple. It's just a matter of brakes on, rev up the engines. When you get close to about 75 or 80%, fan speed, which is the top 2 dials on the right-hand side of the engine instrument cluster. You can see them coming up now as the fan spools up. Right around there, we'll let the brakes go. Generally, the aircraft's going to stay tracking down the center of the runway. Nose wheel steering is pretty touchy until about 75 knots or so when it's disabled and the rudders take over. Around 100 knots, we start adding some fairly significant back pressure, maybe about half a stick. The nose comes up at between 130 and 150, and then it's gear up and flaps up, keeping the nose, under 10 degrees while we continue to build speed. I like to climb out at around 180 knots. So let's take a quick look at the HUD symbology, since we have a HUD. On the right-hand side, we have altitude information until 1,500 feet. You get this sort of little tape that'll go away at 1,500 feet and just be replaced with an actual number. On the left, you have airspeed. Of course, in the middle, we have the pitch angle ladder, and across the bottom, we have the heading tape. So, you can see we also have a square on the screen. That is actually our next waypoint, and if we were to put the total velocity vector, or the flight path vector, over top of the square, we'd be flying exactly to the waypoint. It's a little bit of an aggressive target for a climb for a fully loaded A-10, so we're probably not going to be able to fly directly to it and stick to the 180 or so knots that I want to climb out at, but that's not really a big deal. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner there is some text that tells you how the number of the waypoint and also the distance to the waypoint and the time that it will take to get there. So we're just coming close to the waypoint now, inside a mile, so we're going to start a gentle turn to the right, because that's where our next waypoint is. And then when we're turning, you can see you've got a double hash mark below the heading tape, which shows that the next waypoint is to the right. Once it's actually on screen, the hash mark starts moving with the heading tape, and then the square appears, and then once again it's just a matter of putting the velocity vector and flight path vector in the middle of the square, and we're headed to our next waypoint, and we can start counting down the time that it's going to take us to get there. So as you can see, the A-10A is very much a modern fighter, in that it has taken a lot of the guesswork out of actually flying the aircraft to leave the pilot's attention on actually having an effect, delivering the ordnance, which is what the A-10A does very well. So the HUD has all of the information we need placed right in front of us as we're flying. The plane flies very stably once it's trimmed out. It's basically hands off, And it's pretty much, the rudder is pretty much auto-coordinated. Occasionally you need to use a little bit of rudder input, but by and large you're basically flying the aircraft with throttle and stick. Okay, as we're getting out here closer to the range, it's probably time to check and make sure that we're fenced in properly. Again, this is a very simple procedure in the A-10A. We're just going to go to air-to-ground mode, which you can do with the switch in the cockpit, but I'm not sure that's working, so I tend to use a button on my HOTAS because this is a transition we make often, including in the middle of an attack. We often switch between nav and air-to-ground mode, so we're in nav mode now. It's just a matter of throwing the switch and going into air-to-ground mode. And once you've done that, the panel will be active. Down here, the green lights show which stations have weapons. You can see that the mode we're in is pairs, so ripple size and duration don't matter. And we can see in the lower left of the HUD now, we now have an indication of what weapon we're using, the Mark 82s, and it also tells us how many we have on board, which is a total of 12. So as the waypoint starts to slide by to the right, we're going to start our turn. So we talked about it a little bit in the last video, but one of the things I wanted to show you in flying the A-10A is how it really does open up other possibilities for your air-to-ground sort of attack pattern that aren't available in earlier model aircraft, and that I think actually make the whole process of getting the bombs on target quite a bit easier. So for the first one, we're going to do what would be a fairly typical fighter bomber pass. We're going to bring the target in right close to the cockpit on the left-hand side, and we're going to do a pretty aggressive roll-in like we would have to do in earlier aircraft. Again, just putting the lift vector onto the target and pulling the flight path vector up to the target. Just going to stop it moving in time, and get it on the target, and roll out, and then we go to air-ground mode, so we get the CCIP pipper, and deliver the bombs. And as you can see, we were a little bit short. Now, one of the things about that approach, sort of the standard fighter-bomber approach, is it is pretty aggressive. And as you can see, we were kind of doing a lot of maneuvering at the end to try and get ourselves lined up. Now, with the CCIP pipper, that's a lot easier than it would have been in an earlier model aircraft. You can see how we did there. Not bad. But as we're going to show you in this next run, you don't actually have to roll in and dive quite as aggressively in the A-10, and that should make it easier to actually deliver the ordnance a little bit more accurately. So for this next one, we're also going to show how to use a different delivery mode or weapons mode. Just get ourselves sorted out here on our way out. We're going to go down. We're going to change to ripple pairs. So that's the center dial. We're going to turn until the arrow points to ripple pairs there. We're going to set a ripple interval of 30 milliseconds, just because that sounds like a good number. And then we're going to change the ripple quantity to 4. So that doesn't mean 4 ripples, that means 4 total bombs. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The ripple counter counts the number of weapons that will be deployed, not the number of ripples. Okay, so we're set up to basically drop 2 pairs of bombs on the next target. And I think I'll pick one of the buildings this time, as it's a slightly larger target. Okay, this time instead of snugging up right to the target and putting it right under the rim of the cockpit like we did the last time, which is sort of what you need to do in a lot of the older style iron bombers, we're going to take a bit more of a rounded approach here and come in a little bit more obliquely. And it's going to mean that we're not going to need to do nearly as aggressive a roll-in. And it also means we're not going to have to dive quite as steeply. And the reason for that is that the A-10 has so much better visibility over the nose that, in fact, the impact point of the bombs are visible when you're not having to dive quite as steeply. The reason you have to dive 45 or 65 degrees, for instance, like in the Sabre, is because just the bomb impact point isn't visible to you unless you dive that steeply. In the A-10, as you'll see, the CCI P-pip will be well on screen, even though we're only diving at 20 or 25 degrees, which makes for a much more accurate approach. So as you can see, still the same roll-in procedure, but it's much less aggressive. Gives us much more time to find the target. Now we're going to use that building. We're going to get rolled out. We're going to pull up, so get lined up. And now we have a nice long opportunity to make sure we're well lined up. And even though we're barely diving at 20 degrees, the CCI P-pipper is well on screen. Gives us lots of opportunity to see the target and to deliver the bombs. You can see that was a nice accurate drop, and also, but it gave us a lot more time, and you know, the pull-off even was didn't need to be nearly as aggressive. We still dropped at a fairly good altitude, and we probably could have dropped higher. So this is one of the sort of features of the A-10. Let's take a look at how we did. 4 bombs basically distributed across the target. The mid 3,300 feet, probably would have wanted to be a little bit higher than that. But as you can see, those kind of results would be really pretty hard to achieve even in something like the A4. It's pretty hard to get that kind of distribution on a target at a 3,000 foot drop. It's certainly a much more exciting exercise. So this is what the evolution of the Iron Bomber has brought us to. Alright, so let's do one final pass. This time let's go to Ripple Single, and let's actually drop all the 6 remaining bombs that we've got. We'll go to a slightly longer interval, and we're going to drop them on the 3 little round targets on the right-hand side of the range, and just show you what it's like to actually draw a string of bombs in the A-10. Okay, and this is going to give us an opportunity to even make this a shallower pass, so we're going to extend our circle out here a little bit farther and come around nice and shallow so that we can make sure that we get a lot of opportunity to actually spread the bombs across the target. You can see that we're able to do this basically because the A-10 was designed to do this job. Everything about the A-10 is designed to make it easier to drop ordnance. The cockpit, even the speed of the aircraft, are all designed to make it easier to be able to see where your ordnance is landing on the ground and give you the tools to make that easier to line up, and to take a lot of the guesswork out of it. And that's because if you're flying an A-10 in anything like a modern combat situation, and including the combat situation that was expected in the 1970s or 80s when the aircraft were designed, you're going to have to be spending a lot more of your time evading the threat. So you don't want to be spending as much of your time trying to actually hit the target. That has to be easier if you want to be able to do this in a survivable way, and that's the thing that changed since the 1940s. Even though flak was a big problem in the Second World War, it wasn't nearly as menacing as it is in the 1970s and the 1980s. So now you can see we're diving in. We're not even at 15 degrees. Just going to keep it held there to make sure we get a CCI P-pipper in time. And there it is. So now we're going to be able to drop the bombs, and we're just going to try and start at the front of the pattern and see if we can spread them along the line there. And you can see it wasn't completely well calibrated, but it wasn't bad. Alright, and as we're waiting for our results here, I will point out that a little other innovation that I have slipped into this video is we're using, again, the latest version of the target impact tracking script, version 2.2, and this comes with a couple of features, the first of which is the grouped target impact that you're looking at there, which basically groups your bombs when it thinks that you were trying to basically drop multiple target warheads at the same target, but it also allows you to go back and see the individual impacts if you wanted to. So you can analyze your results in a couple of different ways, which is useful. The other feature that's been added to target impact tracking script at this point is that it now also fully supports the auto pass, which I was kind of pluging before in my last video. Now Draken has upgraded the script, so basically it supports that natively, and you can actually enable that if you want to. It basically uses a zone. You define a zone around the target, and when the aircraft enters the zone, the first pass is automatically initiated. The pass is terminated. The results are given to the pilot after a timeout period after you deploy the weapons, and you can decide how long you want that to be. I think I'm using 30 seconds currently. And then after that, another pass is automatically initiated, so you don't actually have to use the radio calls, which for me was an issue because I kept forgetting to do it. Okay, so we're done on the range. If you want to stick around just a little while longer, we are going to take the A-10A in and land. And first thing we need to do is slow down. I do have a waypoint program, but it's a little bit high, I've realized. It's at 4,000 feet, probably should have been closer to 3,000. So I'm a little bit under the waypoint. And we're just slowing down, and I have also deployed the speed brakes now to try and slow down a little bit more. I'm going to aim to kind of get to that waypoint off the end of the runway at around 3,000 feet, probably around 200 knots. Maybe a little slower than that. Well, don't want to be too much slower, so I'm picking up speed. Landing in the A-10A is similarly pretty much simpler than just about any of the other line bombers, even than the Harrier. So we're down to 170 knots. That's not bad. That's going to let us deploy the flaps into gear. Don't want to get a whole lot slower than that, though. And we're coming down to close to 3,000 feet here, 180 knots. So we're going to deploy the first notch of flaps. And we'll put the gear down once we've actually turned on the final. You can see the runway coming up there. So we'll just keep her level, keep her around this speed. I'm not doing this by the numbers or by the book. I'm sure there are both available. I'm just doing this very just a practical example of how to do it to show you that it's really is quite simple to get the A-10A on the ground. Even with the mistakes that I'm making, these are not going to be critical. So we're slowed down to around 170 now as we're turning in on final. And pick up the power, drop the gear, start bringing the flaps down, and as with any modern fighter, the trick is to modulate your attitude to get the AOA indexer. That's the thing on the left-hand side of the cockpit, if you didn't know. We want to get the green circle, which means we need to keep raising the nose and slowing down. Once we have the AOA established, we're going to stop touching the pitch, and we're going to change our touchdown point with power, and the touchdown point, of course, is where the total velocity vector is. So you can see exactly where the airplane is aimed. We're just still slowing down. Once we've gotten the green circle, then we're not going to adjust that location with pitch anymore. We're only going to use power. So just jockeying power and pitch, trying to keep the total velocity vector there. You see now we're just almost there, right about there. Now I'm trimming the aircraft out to keep the circle on, and now I'm just going to start using power. I'm aiming a little bit short because I like to kind of shallow out the approach at the end and make the touchdown a little more gentle. The A-10 is designed to basically land essentially like a Navy fighter. You're designed to just fly it right into the ground and not flare, although for style points I like to flare at least a little bit. So you can see I'm keeping the total velocity vector just a little bit short of the runway. As we get closer to the ground, we'll start picking that up and just shallow out our descent.
Altitude.
We're at 500 feet down now, which isn't bad, but I'd like to be a little bit less than that right at the end. I'm just putting a little bit of power back in. You can see it's very easy to control this. There's not a lot of the lag that you see in the earlier planes, and it certainly isn't the dance of stick and rudder that it is in a piston fighter. I'm a little bit off center. And as we're slowing down, the AOA goes up. And that's okay, because now we're flaring, power's off, and we're down. And then in the A-10A, you got to remember that the nose does still have a long way to come down, because on the ground it is very nose down aspect. Alright, we're home in the A-10A. Hope you enjoyed that video. Hope you get a chance to go out and try the A-10A. It really is a lot of fun to fly, and it really is the Iron Bomber evolved, so to speak. If you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe and recommend the channel to your friends. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.